Hi, welcome to my channel. Previously, I demonstrated the Moon Phases Quilt Block. Now, we're turning into the Moon Phases Block Quilt Top. And this is a realistic view of how I put quilts together in my small space. Part of the philosophy of my channel is using what you have in the space that you have. And I really do lay out my quilt blocks on the bed. I often have to work around cats, but it's still easier for me physically than laying it out on the floor. And I don't have the wall space either. This video has the instructions to put together the block. This is a quick overview. Full moon, and then the phases of the moon. Kind of simplified. It makes a 16 by 16 block, which you can cut lengthwise. You can definitely leave the block 16 by 16. It will make your quilt come together so fast. I used limited fabrics, so I wanted a little more variety. So I'm cutting it 8 by 16. I am alternating by the center panel, the focal panel color, kind of laying it out and seeing what I like. I just work around the cats. They're pretty sleepy right here, so they just kind of stay there, but sometimes they're a little too playful and they do get removed from the surface. So when I have the layout that I like to organize row by row, top to bottom, left to right, and label them as I go. Small space in cats also means you can't let your blocks sit out. I think these scrapbooking 12 by 12 containers are great. Working from left to right, place the second block face down on the first block. Sew down the right vertical seam, 1/4 inch seam. Add the next block and repeat, always sewing the right vertical seam until the row is finished. You can press each seam as you're sewing or the whole row when it's done. I think this is a very beginner-friendly quilt top. It's all straight seams. This is the trickiest bit, and that's just lining up that your rows line up together, that the seams hit at the same spot. But I think there's always going to be a couple of spots that, maybe you're like a 1/4 inch off. And honestly, once the quilt's put together, you don't really notice. Don't get sad. Don't let that stop you. Getting in that headspace that everything needs to be exactly lined up and exactly perfect can stop you from enjoying the quilt making process. There's no quilt police here. This is finished is better than perfect. Wanting everything to line up is a goal, but not something to beat yourself up over if it doesn't happen. Once the quilt's together, you're really not noticing. You're seeing so many small details because you're seeing every step of the process, but the recipient of the quilt, or when you are just using the quilt, you're not going to notice those things. When you have finished pinning or clipping your rows together, sew down that seam, 1/4 inch seam allowance, the entire length of the quilt top. I didn't show it, but press that seam, open it up, press the quilt top as well. You're going to repeat that process with rows 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, however big, however many, 2 rows at a time. This is quilt standard 1/4 inch seams. I'm using a 1/4 inch foot. I find that it helps me stay in line without thinking too much. I usually just use my fingers, but I thought that maybe that was a little irresponsible to show. So you can see I show that you could use a stiletto. There is just using a pen to help guide, because these seams are going to be sitting. Sometimes you have to fold them under the presser foot. I am a little bit more of a haphazard quilter, so I know that there's a way to press things to the one side so they're always going to sit the right way. Basically, I just go with the way it's naturally sitting, make sure it's under there and doesn't get twisted. How you assemble the rows is preference. I usually do top 2, then 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8. But you could just keep adding on. It's really just how you are best organizing it for your brain. Basically, you have your 8 rows. So whatever combinations to keep you organized and together works. I piece top row to row 2, 3 and 4, and then all together. So there's 4 rows right there. That's Sherman. And then I did the same for the bottom, and then sewed the 2 halves together. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, there's Blixa, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 2 halves for the whole quilt. I do typically use leftover fabrics from the top of the quilt for the quilt backing, and I'll get into that in a separate video, probably, maybe. But I have all these strips left over from the quilt blocks, so I'll probably incorporate those into the backing. I am a big proponent of pressing the seams as you go. I think it makes the whole process easier. It'll make it easier to quilt. I think it's also boring to watch someone iron, so I didn't show you every step of the way, but it is very helpful. And here it is together. This version is pretty scrappy, works for solids, whatever you want to do. It's pretty flexible, and as you can see, my seams aren't lined up exactly perfect, but once you're using that quilt, you're really not going to notice. So don't be hard on yourselves. My quilt finished 62 inches by 59 inches, which is a nice size for a lap quilt. But the beauty of a 1-block quilt is adaptability. You could use 3 by 3 of the 16-inch blocks and have the fastest baby quilt. Essentially, I just want it to be flexible, work for you. I use what I have, you use what you have, and it all works. I'm trying to use up my stash. I hope it helps you use yours. And I have one more bonus way to use the Moon Phases Quilt Block coming up in a future video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.